Hi, I'm Nan Little, and I'm here on behalf of the Northwest Parkinson's Foundation to talk to you today about my experiences with Parkinson's and to see how they correlate with your experiences. Next slide. I've been keeping a journal for most of my life, and it's helpful to go back and check out and see what changes have happened. I looked and I saw in October of 2007, I'm feeling strange tonight, hard to describe, like my brain isn't fully functioning. I'm having difficulty sequencing what we've done over the last few days. Then in January, my hand shaking nearly stopped yesterday and was very slight today. I would sure like to have that go away. It feels like I have Parkinson's or something, and has been going on for several months, many months. A month later, I asked a former movement disorder specialist friend of mine to come over and check me out. Dr. P came over and told me I have Parkinson's. Funny how one day turns a life. You go from being a person to being a person with a medical subset, a person with Parkinson's. Next slide. There are three things I'd like you to take away from this presentation this morning. First of all, it's not your fault. Secondly, you have choices, and you can do this. I think almost everybody I've met who has Parkinson's felt it was their fault for some reason. What did they do? What happened? Why did I get Parkinson's? It's not your fault. And you can hide if you want, or you can say, I have choices. And you can make different choices. You will make different choices. And the choices you make will determine how you live with your Parkinson's. And you can do this. Next slide. Well, what is Parkinson's disease anyway? It's called a movement disorder. It's idiopathic, which means no known origin. And when I was diagnosed, they told me it was 2 to 3% of the people with Parkinson's had a genetic variety, and now it's more like 3 to 10%. So they really don't know what causes Parkinson's, and therefore we don't know how to cure it. Next slide. Things that we do know about it are that it is incurable. It's neurodegenerative, which means it keeps on going no matter what you do. It's a part of your brain is dying. 70% of the substantia nigra is dead by the time the symptoms appear. The substantia nigra is a place at the bottom of the brain, and it's a place that produces dopamine. What we know about it is that it is a three-legged designer disease. There are physical aspects to it, cognitive aspects to it, and emotional aspects to it. Next slide. Physically, people often notice right off the bat that they have a tremor. That was what I noticed, that tremor was not going away. There's a stiffness in the body. If you stay in one place too long, you sometimes just can't move. I'll get up at 2 or 3 in the morning sometimes and do wall push-ups just to get rid of the stiffness. You lose your sense of balance, or you may lose your sense of balance, and you may walk and it looks like you're drunk. There's slowness, like I'm exhibiting now, bradykinesia. It's hard to keep talking at a rapid pace. One of the most difficult things about it is dystonia, where your fingers will cramp up, curl up, and they just stuck, or your toes, or you'll have cramps in your legs. And then something that everybody's familiar with is the dyskinesias, the uncontrolled movements. If you think of Michael J. Fox or Muhammad Ali, those people have dyskinesias where their hands are flapping around and their body's flapping around, and they just can't control it. Tough. Next. Cognitively, you have confusion. You lose track of where you are or where you're going or where you want to be. Hallucinations. Now, there's some funny things happen with hallucinations. If you can keep in your mind around the idea that they're not really there, you can really sort of enjoy them in some respect. One night, Doug and I were sleeping, and I rolled over and looked at him, and there was a young man there, stark naked, beautifully built. I couldn't believe my eyes. I pulled up on my elbow to have a better look, and there was Doug under the covers, fully dressed. Oh well, but it was fun. You lose your executive functions, the ability to think sequentially, to multitask, and it's possible that you have dementia. There's a special dementia that goes with Parkinson's called Lewy body dementia. But it generally manifests itself before the physical symptoms. So if you already have physical symptoms and you don't have Lewy body dementia, which is good news. Next. Emotional part is really hard. There's a sense of isolation where you can't communicate your feelings and you have apathy. This leads to despair and depression, and then you're anxious about the whole thing. Oftentimes when you're at a party, you're talking with 3 or 4 people, And the conversation goes on, and you're left trying to remember what you wanted to say. By the time you've formulated what you want to say, they're 3 or 4 degrees down the conversation line. And so you just don't communicate. And after a while, you don't want to go to parties. But then you pick yourself up and you say, I'm not going to be anxious about this. I'm just going to do it. And you can, but you have to decide. It's your choice. Next slide. The prevalence of Parkinson's. Well, there are about 5 to 6 million people worldwide who suffer from Parkinson's. 1.5 million in the United States, with 50 to 60,000 are diagnosed each year in the United States. The average age of onset is 62 years and 4 months. Some are much younger. I was 62 years and 4 months when I was diagnosed. Next slide. So here I am with Parkinson's, and I'm feeling sorry for myself and realizing that I'm at the hands of the doctor, and there's nothing I can do but just be manipulated by other people. I like to be in charge of myself. Well, a friend of ours saw a piece on the NBC Nightly News about this neuroscientist at the Cleveland Clinic who had figured out a correlation between high cadence pedaling on a bike and the diminution of Parkinson's symptoms. So I got his number and called him up, and he answered the phone, which I thought was the first great thing about this guy. His name was Jay Alberts. So Jay and I talked, and he invited us to join the Pedaling for Parkinson's group to ride across Iowa in a ride called RAGBRAI, the Register's annual Great Bike Ride across Iowa. It was 450 miles and would last for a week in the middle of summer, July, end of July. And I said, yes, we would go. Well, at this point, I could turn my head 90 degrees. My arm was stiff at my side. My hand was all curled up and cramps. And the idea of riding 450 miles was ludicrous. So of course I said, yes, we would go. And when I started pedaling, let's see, next slide, we would have an average of 35% reduction in symptoms after 8 weeks. The residual effects would last 4 weeks or more after stopping cycling, if you chose to stop cycling. Next slide. So realizing that I didn't know how to pedal 450 miles in a week and being terrified that I would mess up, I started cycling at the end of April in 2009. I would cycle anywhere from 1.5 hours to 4 hours a week, or each time I cycled, and I'd go 4 to 6 days a week doing this. My husband thought I was nuts. I did too. But a month after starting this intense cycling, I was walking my dogs, and I looked down, and my arm was swinging just like the other arm. There were no cramps in my hands. I was able to stand up. My head was fully rotational. And I didn't have Parkinson's anymore, it seemed to me. I went to see my doctor, and he said, if I didn't know you had Parkinson's, I wouldn't diagnose it. Amazing. That lasted for quite a while. Next slide. So then we set off for Iowa. We took our bikes, and wherever we stopped, we'd hook up my bike on a trainer, and I would train at least for an hour with the high cadence bike. And then, next slide. After biking, then we'd go fish. I had a great time. I was so happy fishing and biking that I didn't really think too much about Parkinson's. Next slide. Knowing that exercise is medicine gives us a tool to gain some control. We can choose to use it or not, and we can change our mind. But exercise is our medicine, and that gives us some self-efficacy. Next slide. So we finally got to Iowa. People say Iowa is flat. People are wrong. This was amazing. My usual training ride was 18 miles, and our group, Pedaling for Parkinson's, camped 18 miles from the starting point. So by the time I started the first day, I had already gone my usual daily round of biking. At any rate, never mind. I learned that if you started at the top of a hill and just let go, didn't use any brakes, made sure you had a straight line of sight, you could get halfway up the next hill. And that's what I did over and over and over. Had a blast. Went 6 times across Iowa and had a wonderful experience each time. Next slide. At the end of the day, we even had enough energy to dance. Why not? Some of these people are my very close friends. Next slide. And of course, we brought along our support staff. Next slide. In late 2010, I was contacted by somebody who wanted us to join them climbing Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa. The core group was composed of 10 people with multiple sclerosis and 4 with PD. We were supported by a partner and climbing staff for a total of about 130 individuals. The climb took 1 week, but it changed my life. Mount Kilimanjaro is 1 mile higher than Mount Rainier, 19,340 feet. Imagine just looking out at Mount Rainier and thinking, a mile higher than that? Oh my gosh, it was amazing. Next slide. I knew that when I went on my bike trips across Iowa, I took a sheet of paper and I wrote down the names of all the people who donated to help support me on this ride. So I wrote to my friends an email and said, would you please send a little piece of fabric with your name on it, maybe 2 inches by 3 inches, and I'm going to sew them together and make a little banner so that I have some encouragement along the way, so all of you are with me as we go. Well, obviously my friends don't know how to measure 2 inches by 3 inches, and they sent all sorts of things for me to put together. It turned out the banner was 8.5 feet long, 3 feet wide, and weighed 2.5 pounds, which was not what I could afford. But I took it anyway, and on certain occasions, my guide carried the banner. But it's great to have encouragement. Here's the route up the Great Barranco Wall. It's also called the Breakfast Wall. You come into the campsite the night before, and there's a ground fog, so you can't see what's happening the next day. But when you wake up and you look out, you see that this is the trail going up the Great Barranco Wall. People lose their breakfast. It's also called the Breakfast Wall. Some people in Seattle told me that this was a walk in the park at high elevation. As you can see, it was much more than a walk in the park at high elevation. Next slide. But despite the difficulty of the climbing and the terrain, the beauty was remarkable. This is a couple nights before going to the top. Here's our little tent, and other little tents, and the moonlight shining on Mount Kilimanjaro. Next slide. On the way over to Africa, Doug picked up a cold on the airplane, and he was coughing the whole time. His blood oxygen was low. Mine was high. And he said, just as we were going out for the last night, I know you can make it. And he had to turn around. But I had that thought from him, his love and his confidence to carry me up the mountain. Next slide. That's not me on July 18th, 2011. I got there a couple hours later than that, when that picture was taken. But I did make it. I was the last one in our group and the last one of any group that was climbing the mountain that night. I was probably the oldest person woman with Parkinson's who has climbed to the summit of Mount Kilimanjaro. Preparation and outcomes. We climbed thousands of steps, carrying packs of 25 and 35 pounds respectively. We climbed every small mountain in sight in Washington and in British Columbia. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. It took 7 months or more to recover. Some parts, reading, cognition, never recovered fully. My PD symptoms returned because I was not biking, and they were intensified. I wondered if I'd made a mistake. Next slide. Doug was really concerned about whether he couldn't get to the top of Kilimanjaro because of his cold or because there was something about his body that wouldn't take the altitude. So the next year we went to Nepal and went to Annapurna Base Camp. And he had no trouble climbing that at all. So we knew that he was okay. But that was the most beautiful hike I've ever been on. It was just wonderful. Next slide. I took pictures all along the way, and this one had nothing to do with our trip or climbing the mountain, but I just thought it was so cute the way that they stored their baby in a big basket and hung it over a 1,000-foot cliff. Next slide. We climbed stone steps. It was a good thing we practiced climbing stone steps in Seattle because there were thousands of them on the climb to Annapurna. Next slide. In Nepal, I realized that one of the things that Doug and I often say is adventure is adversity recalled. Well, we had a lot of adventures. The climb to Annapurna Base Camp meant you'd climb up a mountain, you'd climb down the mountain, you'd cross a river, climb up a mountain, climb down a mountain, cross a river, up, down, cross, over and over. We got to one place and an avalanche had taken out the bridge across the river. And so that's just the way we had to go. There was no turning back. So forward we went. Nobody fell in. In Nepal, I realized that the more I focused on pain and things I couldn't do, the more debilitated I became. I have to remind myself, I have a disease. I'm not sick. Next slide. So the following year, we decided we kind of got into this habit of going places and climbing things. So we went to Peru and climbed to Machu Picchu, camping along the way. The people were funny. The people were wonderful. And the sights were amazing. We had community. And one of the people who was there was an opera singer. I asked her to sing Climb Every Mountain. And it was miraculous. I cried. We have some choices. We have a lot of choices every day with PD. We can embrace it and say, okay, what's the opportunity here? We can confront it and try to deny it. We can become a partner in research. I've been involved in over 25 research projects. Some of them where I have to go back east to actually do the research. We can choose to exercise. We can choose to take medicine. We can choose to accept support, seek it. But the one thing is true is you just can't ignore it. I wrote a book to encourage people with Parkinson's to fill every day with meaning, hope, and great expectations. There's no point in worrying about tomorrow. Tomorrow will take care of itself. Goals are important. If we say, my goal is to climb Mount Kilimanjaro, and then realize that that isn't going to happen, we set ourselves up for failure. We can set short-term obtainable goals, but we're only partly in charge of our disease. Some people say that you can do anything you want, that Parkinson's doesn't need to deter you. That's not true. You can't do anything you want, but you can do a lot. What's next? Giving back. You can take action like joining or starting Pedaling for Parkinson's programs or other exercise programs. If you want to be involved in research, go to the Fox Trial Finder, and they will walk you through ways to become involved in research. You can become on boards. You can volunteer to aid the Michael J. Fox Foundation or the Davis Finney Foundation or any one of a number of other organizations to advocate for people who have Parkinson's. Next slide. Here are groups of people at YMCAs in their Pedaling for Parkinson's classes. And they not only pedal to help their Parkinson's, they found a support group on wheels. And they look forward to meeting each other every week, 3 times a week. And they comment on how they've changed because they've been part of Pedaling for Parkinson's. It's a gift. Next slide. Here I am at Stanford as a part of a research project involving young blood plasma. Research doesn't hurt. And who knows, maybe one of these projects one day will help discover a cure for Parkinson's. Next slide. And advocacy can involve writing a book or reading books that are available. The Peripatetic Pursuit of Parkinson's Disease was written by the NeuroWriters group. It's not for sale anymore, but it's for free. You can download it from the Michael J. Fox website. It's arguably the best book that has been written on Parkinson's. Next slide. The graphics are pretty funny. There were 130 people who got involved in producing this book or contributing to this book. There's even a page on me and Mount Kilimanjaro. It's very inspiring. And it's free. Next slide. Now I talk about the things that I've done and the fun things that we've done, but it isn't all fun. It's not always easy. I have something called REM sleep behavior disorder, which means that when I have violent sleep dreams at night, I act them out. And so Doug has had some times where he's had a fist coming at him. One time I had a dream about one of the people on the Kilimanjaro trip. And I needed to kick her out of the room. So I swung my leg back. Mind you, I'm still asleep. And I swung my leg forward as hard as I could to try to get her gone. She was gone all right the moment my toe hit the nightstand. And I crushed the joint. It took over a year to heal. And then when we rafted through the Grand Canyon, I repeatedly dislocated my kneecap 7 times in one day. I've had 2 surgeries on that. And now I'm wearing a leg brace for the next few months. But there are more. I can't cycle after surgery, so my Parkinson's gets worse. But I wouldn't have missed any of the adventures or opportunities, even though there's a price to pay. It all goes back to choices. At the end of the day, I have memories and connections, and I know I've done something to help people with Parkinson's. Every day I struggle to ensure there's meaning in my life. Every day we all climb mountains higher than Killy, and often there is no one there to cheer. Your mountain may be brushing your teeth or walking around the block. I used to say that and think it was sort of funny. But some days, especially now, those are my mountains too, especially walking around the block. I can't do it yet, but I will. In another few weeks, I'll be walking around the block. And then I'll be back on my bike. And I'll be trying to change my relationship with Parkinson's. Other adventures that we had was going down the Grand Canyon in 2017. That's where I dislocated my knee so many times. The next year we went to climb around Mont Blanc, but we decided that I wasn't strong enough to do the climb around Mont Blanc, so I went with the luggage guy in the van and had many wonderful experiences with him and got to see a lot of Mont Blanc too. We've been to the Galapagos Islands twice, once to babysit for our grandchildren, and then in 2020 to celebrate our 50th wedding anniversary. We went to see the Northern Lights in Norway in 2019. Beautiful, just beautiful. Next slide. But perhaps my favorite place to go is Silver Creek, Idaho, south of Ketchum. And we man the visitor center for 2 weeks at the end of October each year. So we meet all kinds of people who are coming to fish at Silver Creek or to bird watch or to do other things. And we get to be there with the moose and the fish and the wonderful people. It's truly my favorite part of the year. Next slide. Last year, October 30th, it was 20 degrees. Every time you cast your line, you had to get the ice off it. Next slide. Later on in the day, it started to snow. I stopped fishing, but I still loved every minute of it. Next slide. The necklace that I'm wearing here and is in this picture is the molecule of dopamine. That dopamine is, remember that stuff that's missing in your brain? You can make dopamine. It's not complicated. You just pedal. You can do this. Next slide. So remember, it's not your fault. You have choices, and you can do this. I hope you believe something about this is for yourself as well.